Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here. My name is Kat and I make houseplant videos here on Good and Planty. If you just so happen to absolutely love this video, please consider liking it, commenting, subscribing, or follow me on Instagram. All of these things help me grow my channel like a plant. Today is going to be all about the Philodendron micans, otherwise known as the velvet leaf philodendron. Or, if I'm being saucy, a knockoff baby melanochrysum. Today I'm going to talk about care tips for this plant, such as water, light, soil, fertilizer, propagation, all that good stuff, so that you can have a happy and thriving and maybe 5-foot tall micans. Jumping right into it, let's start with water. This one is one of the harder areas of care for the micans just because it's not as vocal as a lot of other plants. The most prominent thing that I see this plant do to communicate that it's thirsty is the leaves will slowly start to curl in, but usually at that point it's a little bit too late, so I wouldn't use that as a tip. This plant really does enjoy drying out between waterings because it is susceptible to root rot, which is when there is too much moisture built up in the soil. I do like to wait for my moisture meter to read at like maybe a 2, maybe a 3, but kind of a 2, and then I just go ahead and give it a thorough soak. Bright lighting conditions will require you to water this plant more and vice versa. Along with that, in the winter months when the plant is not growing as much and it tends to be a little bit darker, I also pull back on the watering. So you will probably see your plants take a lot longer to get to a 2 on the moisture meter. I am mentioning the moisture meter a lot because since this plant is not vocal, it is truly just the best way to tell if it's time to water your plant, especially because this pot is about, I think, 8 or 10 inches. So I do want to get a thorough read on the moisture levels all around the pot because I do stick the moisture meter in a couple different areas so that I can really gauge if this plant needs water. You don't need a moisture meter. You can figure it out. You can put your finger in the soil. You can look for kind of softer leaves curling in, but I really do recommend a moisture meter for this plant specifically. If you are overwatering your plant, you will see signs of root rot, and that basically just means some soft yellow leaves and probably some leaf loss and just kind of like a sad looking plant. And if you pull it out of the pot, it will have dark mushy roots that are kind of like falling off, if that makes sense. On the flip side, if you are underwatering this plant, it will also have leaf loss and yellow leaves, but the soil will probably be very dry and you will notice more crispiness than dark mushiness, if that makes sense, because it's dehydrated. Moving on to light. So this plant really enjoys bright indirect light. I keep this plant honestly in the corner between a south facing and east facing window, so that is a lot of bright indirect light. On the flip side, however, they are low light tolerant, so the good news is if you have north facing windows, this plant should be fine. It just might be a little bit leggy. If your plant is getting too much light, you will see some crisping, some like burnt circular spots, as well as some discoloration. The leaf will probably get a lot more red than normal. If the plant is getting too little light, you will see your leaves getting a lot smaller and that the plant is getting a little bit of a leggy look. And what that means is that there is a lot of space between the nodes and it's not pushing out as much foliage. Your plant in that case is honestly just shooting out long stems so that it can search for a light source. If that starts happening to you, you can absolutely correct it. Just put the plant in a brighter light area and you can actually propagate the leggy growth if you want to cut it off and start a little fresh. And we will talk about propagation later. Soil and repotting. You want to pot this plant up with some well-draining soil that does have some moisture retention but allows water to kind of like seep through fairly easily. I will put the mixture that I use up on the screen, and all of the stuff that I use is linked down below as usual. You also want to make sure that the pot you are using has a drainage hole so that excess moisture has somewhere to kind of drip out of. With these plants, there is absolutely no rush to repot. They enjoy being a little bit root bound, so even if you start seeing them crowd around the drainage hole a little bit, it's okay to push it off as long as you're not seeing a decline in growth. When you are repotting, only go up about 1 inch, maybe 2 max, in size because you don't want to overwhelm the plant with too much soil. The real big tip here with the micans, and this is true for a lot of vining philodendron, is that you want a moss bowl. If you want to see really tall, beautiful growth that has huge foliage, you're just gonna need to promote it to grow up. That's because the aerial roots are gonna have somewhere to grow into, and that's gonna really help establish the plant as it grows longer. If you really are passionate about having the vining trailing look and still want a bushy plant, that is doable for sure. You're just gonna have to kind of prune fairly aggressively and propagate and plug. So you can do that if you want, but if you want like a really healthy, happy micans, I've had really good success with sticking it on a pole. If you want to see how I made this beautiful moss pole, you can absolutely check out the moss pole tutorial that I made here on my channel. It was a lot of work, I won't lie to you, so I'm going to plug that video every single chance that I have. Humidity and temperature. This plant is pretty chill with your average home temperature. If you're comfortable, the plant is comfortable. Just keep them away from any drafts, hot or cold. So that can be things like doors or air vents, you know the drill. As far as humidity goes, higher humidity is probably preferred for this plant, as with a lot of other philodendron, but this is not one of the more particular plants that absolutely need it to thrive without crisping. I don't really have any high humidity for this plant. It doesn't sit close to a humidifier at all, and it is very happy, so does not need high humidity to thrive. However, if you have a spot with high humidity and you put a micans in it, it might give it a little bit of an extra boost, and you might see some faster, larger growth. Fertilizer. When this plant is growing, you should fertilize because this plant grows fast and it would love extra nutrients. I personally just tend to not fertilize in the winter, but this plant is growing and I could fertilize it if I wanted to. I personally use Espoma's organic balanced fertilizer. I talk about it in every single video that I post. But if you are new here, I take that fertilizer, I dilute it in my water on watering day, and I just go ahead and water the plant as normal. And I do that about every 2 weeks in the growing seasons. Okay, let's talk about propagation because there are 3 really successful ways to propagate this plant. I absolutely love propagating this plant. Now that I have it at a pretty large size, I would say, it is my go-to trade plant because once it reaches the top of the 5-foot moss pole, I give it a snip, I root it, and then I have a plant available for trade. The first way to propagate this plant, and the most common, is water propagation. All you have to do is find a node, and if you don't know, nodes are kind of like a little bit of a bulge, I guess I would say, on the vine, and usually where aerial roots are going to grow out of. So snip below the node. If you have a longer cutting with a few nodes, just make sure that you at least have one exposed node without a leaf. You don't have to do this, but I do prefer it because it reduces risk of the petiole rotting in the water. I do try to leave about, I don't know, maybe like an inch or 2 above and below the node to reduce any risk of rotting. I let that dry for, maybe like an hour or 2, and then I go ahead and put that cutting in some water, just a container of water. And then I go ahead and switch out that water at least once a week. And then once the roots reach about the 2 to 3 inch point, I will go ahead and pot it up in some airy soil. Here is my water propagation. You can see the roots growing in, and let's see, I have a little bit of a combo here. So here we have a top cutting, and I left, I don't know, that's like roughly an inch at the bottom, and I actually left this leaf on, which I just said that I usually don't do, but apparently I do sometimes. And this is definitely at a point where I would want to repot it. I'm just kind of holding off, whatever. Do as I say, not as I do. And then the top is obviously just the top growth. So here's an instance where I don't make a cut on the top and the bottom, just the bottom. Here we have another pretty typical type of cutting. You can see that I made a cut on the top and the bottom. I tried to leave about an inch at least on both sides, and then I plopped it in some water, and I have the root popping out, and I even have a growth point here. So this is another example of a cutting. So you can either take a cutting off of the top like I did here, or you could take, I think they're called like internode cuttings or something like that. So There you go. The next type of propagation is sphagnum propagation. This is essentially the same idea, but instead of putting the cutting in water, you are putting it in some dampened sphagnum. And instead of changing the water, you are just going in with a spray bottle, maybe every couple days, every week, and just making sure that that sphagnum is in fact moist. And the last way that I'm going to talk about, you can also do air layering, but I've never done that, so I don't really talk about it as much here on my channel. But the last method that I will talk about is propagating nodes or wet sticks. That's basically when you have a stretch of the vine where there is a node but there is no current leaf. You can still propagate those. So just chop it up so that you again have maybe like an inch or two on each side, let it callus over, and then you can place that node on some dampened sphagnum. I would put it in kind of like a greenhouse covered high humidity area, if that makes sense. I'll show you what I have going on. And then just wait till you see a little leaf sprout out and a couple roots, and then you're gonna follow the same potting up method. That's definitely the hardest one, but it's a great way to not waste any nodes on your plant. So like I said, whenever your plants are ready to be repotted, just put them in a well-draining mix and keep them moist for about the first week of being in that pot, and then you can kind of work towards your regular watering schedule. When the cuttings don't really move up when you tug on them in the soil, you know that they have taken to the soil and you are all good to go. Okay, so that's gonna be it for today's video. That is almost everything that I know about the philodendron micans. If you have even more tips or recommendations or whatever, please feel free to drop them down below in the comment section, because it's always very helpful to get other perspectives. If you have any questions about the philodendron micans, also feel free to drop those down below and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe if you want more planty content from me. Like this video, all that good stuff, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!